On the outskirts of New Orleans, hidden among oak trees draped in green moss, the old manor of Maison de Lune still stands, like a scar carved into time. They say that nearly a century ago, it bore witness to a wedding steeped in blood, when the bride, groom, and every guest perished in a night of unspeakable slaughter. Since then, on every full moon, those who dare to draw near swear they hear the wail of a violin and the echo of laughter spilling from its darkened windows. Inside, the celebration never ended. The bride and groom remain, but their faces are gone, and they are waiting for new guests to arrive. Oh. Lydia was a freelance journalist, known for chasing legends and folklore across the American South. New Orleans had always captivated her with its strange blend of voodoo, Catholicism, and the restless ghosts of its past. Yet among the many chilling tales whispered in the city's streets, none unsettled her quite like the story of the Maison de Lune estate. One night, Lydia slipped away from the French Quarter and drove toward the crumbling manor. The locals' warning still rang in her ears. On the night of the full moon, never go near Maison de Lune. But to Lydia, a taboo was nothing less than an invitation. She stepped out of her car, carrying only a flashlight and her worn notebook. When she pushed open the iron gate, a rush of cold air swept out, laced with the acrid tang of rust and the sweet rot of decayed flowers. She followed the broken stone path, each footstep echoing unnaturally in the silence. The closer she came, the louder her heartbeat seemed to thrum. The manor loomed like a corpse in hibernation, waiting for someone to rouse it. And Lydia, with her insatiable curiosity, had willingly become its caller. The air inside Maison de Lune was thick with dust, yet it echoed with sounds that did not belong to the present. Lydia stepped through the grand hall, where enormous mirrors once gleamed, but now lay dim and clouded. For a fleeting instant, she saw her reflection, blurred, indistinct, her face lacking detail. She staggered back, convincing herself it was only the moonlight distorting her image. Then suddenly, a violin began to play. The melody was distant yet sweet, drawn out like a wedding hymn. Lydia held her breath, listening. The music seemed to pour from the ballroom. When she pushed the door open, the sight before her froze her blood. The room glowed with unnatural light. Chandeliers, heavy with dust, blazed with golden fire. Hundreds of figures in 19th century attire glided across the floor in elegant waltzes, their movements silent, their footsteps soundless. But the horror lay in their faces, blank, featureless, like masks never carved. At the far end of the room stood the bride and groom. The bride in stark white, the groom in jet black. Neither bore a face. Instead, where their features should have been was a dark void, a hollow that pulled at Lydia's gaze like a black hole. Suddenly, an unseen guest pressed a glass into her hand. She flinched, dropping it. The red liquid inside splattered across the floor like blood, but in seconds, it vanished, leaving the stone spotless, as though it had never been. The violin fell silent. In that instant, every faceless gaze in the ballroom turned toward Lydia. Auntie. The ballroom froze. Lydia felt as though she had misstepped in an endless waltz, her body out of place in a ritual that had never stopped. The faceless guests had no eyes, and yet she felt them staring, every inch of her skin prickling under their gaze. The orchestra resumed, but the music was no longer sweet. It was shrill, discordant, a cacophony that rattled her bones. The dancers moved again, but their steps were stiff, jerking like marionettes pulled by unseen strings. One guest drifted toward her, lifting her hand as though inviting her to dance. She recoiled, trembling, but its grip was ice cold, the texture hard as bone. Lydia lifted her eyes, and the blank void where its face should have been split open. From the fissure, dozens of skeletal hands clawed outward, raking at the air. Laughter erupted, rolling across the room from every direction, though she could not tell which mouthless figure it belonged to. In the cracked mirror along the wall, Lydia saw her own reflection, yet her face was gone. In its place stretched a smooth, featureless expanse of white. Panic surged. She stumbled back, but another hand clamped down on her shoulder. The bride, her white gown dragged across the floor, stained with sprawling rust-red streaks. The faceless bride leaned closer, her hollow visage a void that threatened to swallow Lydia whole. The music swelled to a fever pitch. The orchestra, those faceless musicians, revealed their secret horror. Their faces had not been lost. They had been stripped away, dangling like masks from the very instruments they played. Each tortured note bled from human flesh. Lydia tried to scream, but her voice died in her throat. The faceless hand reached up, pressing against her cheek, clammy, wet, and unyielding. The sensation was unbearable, her skin stretching, tugging, ready to be torn away. Nyaha, inchadi. The violins shrieked, splintering the air like hundreds of knives clawing at her eardrums. Lydia collapsed onto the ballroom floor, her ears ringing, visions swimming. Yet the scene around her only grew sharper, more grotesque. The faceless guests began to peel away their coverings. One, then another, then dozens. Beneath the white veils were stitched together faces, black threads holding scraps of skin that had never belonged to them. Some faces hung loose, half-attached, exposing the bruised flesh beneath. When they laughed, the sound poured from hollow cavities, echoing like wind howling through crypts. On the banquet table, the towering wedding cake split apart, oozing thick, dark red fluid that stank of rot. Wine glasses filled on their own, brimming with viscous, metallic liquid that sloshed over the rims. Guests raised their cups in unison, toasting, as blood splattered across the white tablecloth. At the center of the room, the bride and groom drifted forward. Their garments, white gown, black suit, fluttered as though gravity no longer applied. They extended their hands toward Lydia, beckoning her to join the wedding. But Lydia knew this was no invitation. It was a sentence. The room convulsed. Doors slammed shut. Candles erupted into flames. Shadows swarmed across the walls like 100 grasping hands. The orchestra changed its tune. No longer a waltz, but the slow, crushing march of a funeral dirge. The violins screamed, no longer instruments, but the cries of souls bound into their strings. A new row of seats appeared, draped in blood-red cloth, reserved for fresh guests. Lydia's breath caught. She saw familiar faces, Marcus, Jonah, stripped of every feature. They sat stiffly, lifeless, hands on their knees, puppets awaiting command. Their flayed faces now hung nearby, ready to be grafted onto the musicians. "No, this isn't real," Lydia whispered, but her voice dissolved beneath the monstrous symphony. The bride raised her hand. Two faceless attendants clamped down on Lydia's shoulders, forcing her to kneel in the center of the hall. A shredded bridal veil dropped over her head, suffocating her in damp darkness. The drumbeat pounded like a colossal heart, pressing the air from her lungs. Then came the final rite, the giving of the mask. The faceless groom approached, holding a human face still dripping fresh blood. The skin mask sagged, eyes clouded, lips pale. Lydia froze in horror as recognition pierced her, Jonah's face. She screamed, thrashing, but the iron-cold hands held her fast. The mask was lowered toward her own, warm blood pattering down her neck. She felt her skin stretch, tug, as though ready to be flayed and replaced. The wedding bells rang 3 times. The hall roared in unison, a ragged chorus chanting, "Welcome, the new bride." In that moment of terror, Lydia understood the most dreadful truth. This wedding would never end. It always hungered for more brides, more grooms, more guests. And now it was her turn. The veil smothered Lydia, suffocating her with its weight. Wedding bells tolled, each peal twisting into the shriek of violins scraping bone. Faceless hands clamped down on her shoulders, forcing her head upward. The groom raised Jonah's blood-slicked face, ready to fuse it to the emptiness where her own should be. In that instant, Lydia saw herself reflected in the mirrors lining the hall. Dozens of them. In each one she was someone else, clad in a bridal gown, seated among the faceless orchestra, twirling without features across the dance floor. Each reflection stared back at her with hollow eyes, each future the same, an endless prison with no escape. The guests erupted in laughter. The veil was torn away, and Lydia found herself draped in a white gown. A moment ago she had worn her worn jacket. Now the dress hung heavy, sodden with blood. The former bride was gone. Lydia now stood in her place. The faceless groom clasped her hand. The touch was colder than ice, and with it surged a poison that spread through her veins. Lydia tried to scream, but no voice came. Her lips moved soundlessly, though somewhere nearby violin strings sang, echoing her every motion. The orchestra roared, and the wedding feast resumed. The faceless guests whirled, spinning around Lydia and her new groom. Blood streamed across the marble floor, yet they glided over it as if it were polished glass. Each step left a red imprint that fractured into cracks, spidering through the stone. Through the haze, Lydia clung to a single thought. If I must stay, I will remember. She tried to hold on, to the music, to the stitched faces, to the laughter scraped raw. But memory itself dissolved, slipping away like mist on the wind. She no longer remembered her name. She no longer remembered why she had come. There was only the wedding. There was only the endless dance. Outside, the full moon bled red across Maison de Lune. Inside, the celebration endured, a faceless bride and groom presiding over an orchestra of stolen flesh. Laughter, music, and bells blended into a grotesque symphony. From time to time, neighbors on the outskirts of New Orleans swore they heard it. The distant waltz, the clinking of glasses, the muffled invitations of voices without faces. They barred their doors, avoiding the road that led to the manor. Yet, curiosity always claimed some. Footsteps always wandered too close. And each time, the feast grew louder. The orchestra swelled. Maison de Lune never sleeps. It hungers for guests. And Lydia, forever veiled in her blood-soaked gown, smiles an invisible smile, bound to the faceless wedding symphony, forevermore. Kenna, E, E, K. In a forsaken graveyard of New England, no trees of wood take root. Instead, they rise from human bone, ribs twisting into skeletal branches, skulls swaying like pale, hollow fruit. Among them moves the gravekeeper, an ancient shadow, silently tending his garden of the damned. Each soul of the unfortunate, once sown, blossoms into another tree of bone, feeding the forest that should never have been. Nen Passy. The fog of New England clung to the earth like a burial shroud, veiling the narrow path that wound up the hill where the old cemetery lay. Michael Hale, a man in his 40s, walked slowly, one hand gripping a weathered leather notebook. An archaeologist by trade, he had little patience for folklore. To him, this graveyard was nothing more than a forgotten relic of the 17th century. Before arriving, Michael had heard the villagers' strange warnings. They told him never to set foot on the hill after sunset. They whispered of pale figures gliding through the mist, of groans rising from beneath the earth, of trees that grew not from wood but from bone. He had laughed, dismissing their words as superstition woven from fear. But the suffocating silence here gnawed at his certainty. At the crest of the hill, Michael stopped before a gate of blackened iron, rusted and twisted. The carvings of crossed bones were nearly worn away. A stone tablet bore a fading Latin inscription, Hic silentis locantur. Here, the silent still speak. He pressed his hand against the gate, the chill bit like metal drawn straight from ice. Inside stretched a garden of the dead. Tombstones leaned and fractured, their inscriptions lost to moss. Weeds choked the soil, yet here and there, pale shapes jutted from the earth like limestone shards. Michael crouched and realized they were fragments of bone, disturbingly clean, as though placed there deliberately rather than left to decay beneath the soil. Michael opened his notebook and began to record everything. The shape of graves, the weathered symbols, even the position of the bones. Then came a creak, sharp, deliberate. Michael's head snapped up. Across the cemetery, near the largest tomb, stood a figure. The fading light sketched a gaunt old man with a hunched back, a long coat trailing the ground, and a rusted spade in his hand. He did not move, yet his sunken eyes seemed fixed on Michael from within the hollow dark of their sockets. Michael swallowed hard. He had not expected a caretaker. Relief should have come, but instead, a cold shiver clawed its way down his spine. The old man's body did not shift, yet the creak came again, like a gate closing of its own accord. Michael turned. The iron gate stood shut behind him, silent and immovable, as if it had never opened at all. Ah! Michael instinctively stepped back as the old man advanced. His black coat dragged across the wet grass, with a sound like bones grinding together. The hollows of his eyes were deep and sunken, his stare pressing against Michael's chest, as if trying to pierce straight through him. "Night has fallen," the man rasped, his voice corroded like rusted iron. "This place does not belong to the living." Michael forced himself to remain steady. He raised the worn leather notebook, his tone firm. "I'm an archaeologist. I'm here only to survey these old graves. I'll cause no trouble." A crooked smile bent the old man's face. "Survey?" he echoed, tapping the head of his spade against the ground 3 times. The sound reverberated hollow and strange, not the thud of solid earth, but the echo of a void beneath. This soil does not hold history. It feeds. A chill ran through Michael, but pride in his profession pushed him forward. "If you are the caretaker, then surely you understand the archaeological value of this place." Some of these stones date back to the 17th century, perhaps even earlier. The old man bowed his head, his trembling hand stroking the shaft of the spade. My name is Elias. I have tended this ground longer than anyone remembers. Those stones tell you nothing. What truly lives here does not rest above the earth. The wind stirred, carrying a rustling like countless hands scratching beneath the soil. Michael froze, his heart hammering. Through the grass, he glimpsed pale shapes, finger bones, writhing upward, retreating just as quickly. He blinked, and they were gone. Only the grass swayed. Elias watched him still, his lips moving as though in prayer. You should not remain past dark. After sunset, the soil hungers. Michael drew a sharp breath, etching the words into memory, though his rational mind refused surrender. I need only one night of study. Tomorrow morning, if you wish, I'll be gone. Elias regarded him in silence, then let out a low, broken laugh that cracked like brittle bone. One night, more than enough for the earth to notice you. He turned and shuffled deeper among the graves, his shadow dissolving into the leaning stones. Michael thought to call after him, but his throat tightened, no sound emerging. The headstones around him seemed to lean closer, their shadows tangling together like skeletal arms reaching outward. By the time the last light drained from the sky, Michael stood alone, the leather notebook open in his shaking hands. In the suffocating dark, only the scratch of his pen on paper could be heard. Yet beneath the damp soil, another sound stirred, an endless rasping, as though hundreds of skeletons breathed in rhythm with him. Ah, noir. Night fell over New England as swiftly as if some unseen hand had snuffed out a vast lantern in the sky. The cemetery drowned beneath a heavy curtain of darkness, lit only by a pale crescent moon, its glow spilling across the crooked stones. Michael stood frozen, pen halted above the page. A strange silence pressed down. No insects, no owls, only the restless wind spiraling through ancient crypts. Then the sound returned. At first it was no more than the patter of pebbles, but it grew, grinding, splintering, the brittle crack of something breaking far beneath the soil. Michael staggered back, eyes locked on the grass at his feet. The earth swelled upward, as though something beneath clawed for release. A sharp snap split the night. From the ground, a shard of bone jutted skyward, pale and glistening under the moonlight. Another followed, curved like a branch. Horror clamped Michael's chest as he realized. Ribs. The branches bent and twisted, joints snapping into place, forming the grotesque outline of a tree clawing its way toward the sky. Not one, dozens. All around him, the earth quivered. Skulls burst from the grass like fruit. Hollow eyes turned toward him. The graveyard writhed, birthing bone trees that groaned as they rose, their skeletal limbs grinding together with a sickening chorus. Michael's breath caught as he stumbled back toward the largest tomb. In the weak moonlight, he saw what made it worse. Many of the trees still clung to tatters of clothing, shoelaces, scraps of fabric, even the glint of a wristwatch. These were not relics of centuries past. They were the remains of the missing. The wind howled, carrying with it a sound more dreadful than any gale. The broken murmur of countless voices. Michael strained to listen, heart pounding, and heard them. Help us! Release us! The earth devours. His legs trembled, but terror chained his eyes to the sight before him. The bone forest climbed higher, trunks weaving into a pale lattice, skulls dangling like rotten fruit, clacking against one another in the cold air. Some rose 10 feet high, their limbs creaking as though eager to embrace him. The cemetery had become a living garden of the damned. Michael turned to flee, but the ground at his back split open too, bone shoots sprouting and snapping shut around him. He was trapped, hemmed in by dozens of reaching trunks. A shudder cut down his spine as one tree nearby bent toward him. Its ribs groaned, splintering as they spread open like fingers ready to seize their prey. The air thickened with the stench of damp earth and the sickly sweetness of rotting flesh. Michael gagged, bile rising in his throat. With a strangled cry, he hurled himself toward the massive tomb at the cemetery's heart. Its stone door hung ajar beneath the moonlight, waiting. He didn't hesitate. He plunged inside and slammed the heavy slab shut behind him. Darkness swallowed him whole. The silence pressed so deep he could hear only the hammering of his own blood. And then, from the depths of the crypt, a whisper unfurled, long and serpentine. "You have entered the garden." Michael stiffened, ice coursing through his veins. In that moment he understood. He was no longer an observer. He was part of the soil now. "Me, I see." Inside the stone tomb, the darkness was thick as a drowned sea. Michael pressed his back against the heavy door, breath ragged, ears still echoing with the brittle crack of bones outside. The air was rank with mold and the faint iron tang of dried blood, choking his lungs until he thought he might suffocate. He flicked on his flashlight. Its trembling beam cut across damp stone walls slick with moss. But it was not only stone. The surface was carved over and over, a mad tapestry of names etched in desperate haste, hundreds of them, clawed in Latin, Old English, and symbols Michael had never seen before. They sprawled like curses left behind by those who vanished. At the tomb's far end stood an altar. Upon it lay a cracked ceramic vessel brimming with fragments of bone, pale and granular like salt. From the floor, black roots wormed upward, coiling around the remains, feeding on them. Michael staggered back, chilled with realization. The earth here did not merely devour, it cultivated. A rasping voice rose from the shadows behind him. "You've seen it now." Michael spun, light quivering across Elias, the gravekeeper, stepping forth from the dark. He still clutched his rusted spade, his coat dragging low, but the beam revealed something worse. His skin was fissured with cracks, in places peeling back to expose the bone beneath. Beneath that wrinkled husk, Elias was little more than another living tree of bone. What are you?" Michael stammered. Elias chuckled, the sound sharp as snapping ribs. "I am only the sour. You saw the garden outside. The soil thirsts for souls. It devours the dead, but without a hand to tend them, they would wither. I feed them. I watch over them." Michael trembled, yet curiosity forced the words from him. "And the missing? They are your trees as well." Elias inclined his head slowly. "The wanderers, the sinners, even the curious, like you. Any who set foot upon this land become seed for the garden. That is the covenant. The earth grants me existence, and in return I plant. Call me monster if you will. I have only kept my vow." Michael backed away, heart pounding. I can't stay here." Elias advanced, his shadow stretching across the walls, carved with the names of the dead. You are already here. The gate behind you will never open again. The earth has recognized you, and it craves you for its next tree. The flashlight shook in Michael's grip, its beam catching Elias's face. His eyes were no longer eyes at all, only gaping hollows. From his mouth writhed slender bone roots, squirming like parasites. Elias raised the spade, its handle blackened, its blade glinting cold. "I do not kill you," he whispered. "I plant you." The ground beneath Michael split apart, jagged cracks yawning wide. Skeletal hands thrust up, clutching at his ankles. He screamed, struggling, but the grip only tightened, dragging him inch by inch toward the soil. In that frantic instant, clarity struck him. He had only two paths: surrender to the earth's hunger, or shatter this vile covenant, whatever price it demanded, even if it cost his own life. And Elias stood above him, smiling faintly, the way a farmer smiles as the seed finally sinks into the waiting ground. Ingen, umaya. Michael screamed, wrenching at his legs as skeletal hands clamped tighter, dragging him down. The pull tore his skin open, blood spilling into the soil, hungrily swallowed as if poured onto smoldering ash. Despair crushed his chest, suffocating every breath. "No, I don't belong here." He clawed at the stone wall, desperate to resist the earth's hunger. Elias only watched, hollow eyes sinking deeper into shadow, his voice calm and resonant, like a litany whispered at the end of time. "You belong to the garden the moment you set foot here. Your blood will enrich the soil. Your bones will bloom into new branches. Do not resist. Let the earth claim you." Michael's frantic gaze darted to the altar. The fractured clay urn lay there, brimming with bone dust, its surface tangled in writhing black roots that trembled like starving veins. A thought pierced his panic. If the garden's existence was bound to that vessel, breaking it might sever the pact. With the last of his strength, he lunged, clutching a jagged stone from the tomb wall. The skeletal hands gripped harder, pulling him waist-deep into the ground, but Michael roared, hurling the rock with all his fury at the urn. It shattered with a violent crack. Fragments flew, bone dust burst into the air like a pale storm. From beneath the earth rose a shriek, thousands of voices howling as one, an unholy choir of souls torn free. The skeletal hands around him convulsed, then loosened their grip. Elias's roar split the chamber, his voice breaking for the first time. "You fool! You do not understand what you've done." The tomb quaked. The ceiling split, stones raining down. Michael scrambled free, dragging himself toward the sealed door. His hand pressed against the cold slab, then froze. His fingers were no longer flesh, but bare white bone, the skin shriveled and peeling away. He looked down in horror. His legs too were changing, skin splitting open, bones stretching outward like gnarled roots. The price of breaking the covenant was not freedom, but transformation. A seed, stronger, hungrier, was taking root. Elias writhed in the collapsing dark, yet laughter rasped from his withering throat. "Did you think you escaped? No. You have only taken my place." Michael's scream curdled into the cracking of bone. His body bent and warped, limbs driving deep into the soil, veins hardening into root, joints twisting into branches. His mind dimmed, hollowed, until only the hunger remained, spreading, devouring, eternal. By dawn, the graveyard stood silent, cloaked in mist. The bone trees towered motionless, their pale branches gleaming like ivory. At the garden's heart rose a new trunk, its limbs stark white, and from them dangled a broken pen and a blood-stained notebook. The garden of bone had claimed another, and it would never cease to grow. Known. Within the abandoned asylum, rusted wires bite into effigies suspended in endless decay. Their hollow forms sway gently, as if lulled by a breath that no longer belongs to the living. When night falls, the silence fractures. The figures convulse, their heads twisting in unison to a broken funereal rhythm. Jonah pulled the car to a halt on the gravel road, where withered trees stretched their skeletal branches toward the ashen sky. Before him loomed the asylum, a corpse of concrete and steel, windows shattered, walls peeled and veined with moss. Clara stepped out, her old camera slung over her shoulder, eyes caught between curiosity and dread. They had heard the stories whispered 100 times before, muffled cries echoing down the corridors, shadows dangling in broken windows, and always the same dreaded name, Dr. Harland. Jonah recounted to Clara the rumors of Harland's puppet therapy, drilling into skulls, wiring patients so their bodies could be made to dance. Many dismissed it as grotesque folklore, but others swore those experiments were the very reason the asylum was shuttered overnight. They pushed at the rust-eaten steel doors. Inga screamed, the sound dragging down the hallway like metal tearing bone. Inside, the stench of ancient disinfectant mingled with mildew, as though the air itself had been trapped since the 60s. Clara lifted her camera, snapping shot after shot. Rusted bed frames, suffocating corridors, padded cells gone rotten with mold. Jonah led the way, jotting notes. Clara said nothing, only pressed her shutter again, as though afraid the building's truth might vanish if she didn't capture it fast enough. Darkness thickened as daylight drained from the high windows, swallowing the halls whole. They stopped at the threshold of the great auditorium, where a collapsed wooden stage waited under a ceiling of rusting beams. Jonah felt his own footsteps strike too loud, the echoes bouncing back as though someone unseen matched his pace. Clara drew in a breath, her lens trembling as she tilted it toward the rafters. A sudden flash erupted. For the briefest instant, Jonah glimpsed something. Someone suspended high above. Then blackness reclaimed it. He craned his neck upward, heart pounding, while the air grew heavier, pressing on his chest. From somewhere deep within the asylum came a sound, a drawn-out metallic screech, like strings being tested in the dark. Clara's whisper cracked the silence. We're not the only ones here. Jonah flicked on his flashlight, its narrow beam slicing through the dark. The light swept across the steel rafters above, and his breath caught. Shapes dangled from the beams. From a distance, they looked like patients in tattered hospital gowns, but their skin was gray, stiff, and lifeless as wood. Clara lowered her camera, hands trembling. She had managed one last shot before the flash revealed the horrific truth. One of the figures twitched, a hand jerking slightly, its neck bent at an unnatural angle as if yanked by invisible reins. Jonah swore every hollow eye socket had turned toward them. A chorus of metallic shrieks echoed overhead. The wires shuddered, pulling the hanging forms taut. Then they moved, not with the fluidity of the living, but stiff and jerky, like wooden marionettes forced to dance. Heads snapped in unison, arms lifted, legs curled, all to a rhythm only they could hear. Jonah staggered back against the wall, cold sweat breaking across his skin. He remembered the patient files he'd studied, rumors of skulls drilled open, wires fed into spines, bodies turned into living puppets. He had never believed it. Not until now. Clara clutched his arm, whispering, They're still being controlled, but by who? A heavier movement drew their eyes upward. From the shattered stage at the far end of the hall, something massive was rising. It was no longer a man, but a grotesque fusion of steel cables, rotting wood, and clattering joints. A face patched together, half man, half puppet, hung above a hulking body. Jonah knew instantly who it was, Dr. Harland, or what remained of him. The giant puppet bent low, its elongated arms sweeping wide. When it yanked a lever of wire, every dangling patient screamed in unison, a cacophony of cracking wood, grinding joints, and rusted hinges shrieking. The sound drove Clara to her knees, hands clamped over her ears. Jonah tried to haul her up, his eyes locked on the advancing horde. From the rafters, wires slithered downward like roots, snaking toward the floor, carrying the stench of rust and blood. There was only one choice left: flee deeper into the asylum's maze, or be hoisted up as another lifeless puppet. Jonah gripped Clara's hand hard and shouted, "Run!" Their footsteps thundered down the corridor, chased by the mad symphony of shrieking wires and the wooden convulsions of puppets dancing to their unseen master's tune. Wah! The narrow corridor stretched into infinity. Every step Jonah and Clara took echoing like a death knell. The trembling beam of the flashlight swept across half-open iron doors, their nameplates faded with time. Room 12, Special Therapy, Room 23, Behavioral Experiments. Wind hissed through cracks in the walls, sounding like the labored breaths of invisible patients. Jonah ran, forcing his lungs into rhythm. In his mind, the asylum's cryptic notes spun in a vicious cycle. Marionette therapy, restoring willpower through external control. He had never believed anyone could be cruel enough to attempt such things. But now the truth dangled on wires behind them, swaying in pursuit. Clara halted, pointing to a door left ajar. The faint red lettering still lingered. Operating room. "Jonah, we have to look," she gasped. "There might be answers inside." Jonah hesitated. Every instinct screamed at him to keep running, but Clara's gaze, terrified, yet unyielding, pulled him forward. Together, they shoved the door open. The operating room lay in darkness, save for a few dangling bulbs. One flickered to life with a sickly yellow glow, spotlighting the center table. There, shackled in place, lay the skeleton of a patient, ribcage punctured, spine threaded with rusted wires. Clara lifted her camera and clicked. The flash burst across the back wall, unveiling a grotesque mosaic, dozens of sketches tacked side by side. Human bodies redrawn as puppets, their joints hinged with steel, every pencil stroke marking a drill wound. In the center hung the largest draft, its title scrawled in bold. Project Marionette, Total Control. Jonah's stomach twisted. He stepped closer, trembling fingers brushing the smeared ink. At the corner, a signature still lingered. Crooked, desperate, Harland, 1963. A sudden clang of metal jolted them. They spun around as the ceiling cracked, wires slithering downward to coil around the skeleton's limbs. The corpse jerked violently, then sat upright, jaw grinding with a splintering rasp. Dot. Clara screamed, while Jonah dragged her into the corner. The puppet corpse staggered forward, wires threaded through its eye sockets and chest, twitching with each unnatural step. Every footfall was the sound of wood splintering, every pull of the wires a discordant note. From the distance came a voice, low and rhythmic, like a conductor's count. 1, 2, 3. Jonah froze. Harland was orchestrating the entire asylum like a stage, each puppet moving to his cadence. He squeezed Clara's hand, eyes locked on the narrow exit across the room. Run, when I say now. The puppet advanced, iron arm swinging down. Jonah zeised a rusted bar from the floor and swung upward, clashing against the blow. The screech of metal on metal shrieked through the room, sparks flying. In that instant, Clara dashed through the door, Jonah racing after her. They plunged into another corridor, leaving behind the relentless beat echoing through the asylum, louder, heavier, as if the building itself had a pulse. Jonah gasped for air, one truth burning inside him. Unless they destroyed the thing at the center of it all, they too would be dragged upward to dangle among the others, lifeless marionettes swaying in Harland's grip. Nisai, never way. The metallic shrieks of the wires still trailed them, but Jonah was beginning to notice a pattern. The cadence, 1, 2, 3, echoed from deep within the asylum, steady as a war drum. Each time the rhythm quickened, the puppets they encountered in the corridors twitched awake, turning in unison toward them. Clara, he whispered, the sound guides them. If we follow it, we'll find where Harland is pulling the strings. Clara nodded, her face pale, but a spark of resolve flickered in her eyes. She clutched the camera as if it were the last weapon she had. They descended a rotting spiral staircase. Dust coated the steps, clawed with endless gouges where wires had scraped across the stone. Jonah's hand skimmed a damp brick wall, the chill sinking into his skin like a parasite. As they dropped another level, the beat grew clearer, merging with the taut whine of wires pulled too tight, like a violin tuned past breaking. At the bottom stood a massive iron door. 2 words were carved into its surface: Control Ward. It hung slightly ajar, and through the crack spilled a red glow, pulsing with every count of the rhythm. Jonah drew a sharp breath and pushed it open. Inside lay a circular chamber, its ceiling a high dome from which hundreds of wires dangled like metallic roots. Each tether fed into colossal gears that churned with a grinding tempo. And at the very center, enthroned upon a towering chair, sat the husk of Dr. Harland. His body was no longer whole. Half his face had rotted away, yet his eyes remained open, milky and unblinking. Wires pierced his ribs, spine, even the skull itself, latching him into the machinery. Each turn of the gears yanked his body in violent spasms, and with every jolt came the thunder of puppets shifting above. Clara covered her mouth, choking back a scream. Jonah could not look away. This was no mere mad doctor. Harland had transformed himself into the mechanical heart of the asylum, a grotesque puppeteer wired to his own stage. Suddenly, Harland's eyes swiveled, locking onto them. A voice rolled out, not from his mouth, but from every wire, reverberating through the chamber as though the building itself spoke. The final audience has arrived. The wires shuddered, glowing red-hot. From the fissures in the walls, the patients emerged, dozens of them, shuffling forward. Wooden hands and iron limbs scraped across the floor, closing the circle. Jonah dragged Clara back toward the far corner. His mind raced. He couldn't fight this army. But if Harlan was the center, destroying the machinery might end it all. "Clara, listen," he hissed, urgent. "We have to break the main gear. If it stops, everything stops with it." Clara swallowed hard, then nodded. She clutched the camera tighter, ready to hurl it if it meant shattering steel. The puppets advanced, the circle closing in. Harlan's laughter rattled through the dome, blending with the screech of grinding gears, a death orchestra swelling to crescendo. Jonah tightened his grip on the rusted iron bar, eyes locked on the glowing heart of the machine. There was only one chance, to strike before the wires closed in, before they too were bound, suspended among the asylum's collection of lifeless marionettes. Wah! Jonah tightened his grip on the iron rod, his heart pounding like a war drum. The puppets closed in, their hollow eyes gleaming, wires shrieking as they strained. At the center, Harlan convulsed with each grinding turn of the gears, half his ruined face curled into a grotesque smile. "The audience must join the final act," his voice echoed through the dome, drawn out like a warped lullaby. With a roar, Jonah charged the machine. The iron rod slammed into the blazing gear, sparks bursting in a violent spray. The mechanism shuddered, wires slackened, and the puppets staggered in confusion. Clara screamed his name, her eyes wide with terror. But Harlan would not yield. Wires slashed down from the rafters, coiling around Jonah's arm, wrenching him into the grinding maw. His body jolted violently, blood streaking across steel, mingling with the pulsing red glow. Clara rushed forward, clawing to free him, but Jonah's trembling hand pressed against her chest, stopping her. "Clara, run," he gasped, tears brimming in his eyes. "Let me end this." Her scream cracked the silence, but the wires twisted tighter, dragging Jonah into the core of the machine. With the last breath of his strength, he raised the rod and drove it down. The gear split apart with a thunderous crack. Light flared, then died. Silence swallowed the chamber. The puppets collapsed where they stood, strings cut, lifeless. Harlan's body crumbled with them, torn to rusted wire and rotted bone. Clara fell to her knees. Before her lay only shattered metal and a smear of blood, the last trace of Jonah. He had been consumed by the machine he destroyed. Beyond the asylum walls, dawn broke at last. Pale light crept through shattered windows, but in Clara's eyes it reflected nothing but a hollow void. The memory of Jonah and the shriek of steel wires would haunt her forever, like a play that refused to end, its curtain never falling. NPC.
It's true, I am nervous. But why should you think I am mad? The disease has sharpened my senses, not destroyed them. It has only made me more acute. I hear things better than anyone else. In fact, I hear things that others cannot hear. And it is because of these heightened senses that I know I'm not mad. Listen, and I will tell you how everything happened. It began with the old man's eye. He had the eye of a vulture, pale blue, with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold. It was a cursed eye, one that filled me with disgust and dread. I couldn't bear it. I tried to ignore it, but no matter how hard I tried, that eye would haunt me. Every time I looked at him, there it was, unblinking, staring at me with that ghastly, lifeless gaze. So, I made a plan. For 7 nights, I watched him. Every night, at midnight, I would creep into his room. He slept soundly, his eye closed, so I was safe. But on the 8th night, everything would change. I knew it would be the last night, the final night when I would rid myself of the eye forever. The night came. I prepared myself. I was calm, perfectly calm. I could feel my heart beating steadily, quietly. It was the beating of a man in control. I waited in the darkness, and I watched the old man. I crept up to his bed, making sure not to make a sound, not to stir him. The moonlight seeped through the window, casting an eerie glow on the room. The old man was sleeping, unaware of me. But then, as I stood there, waiting, his eye opened. It was the vulture's eye, the damned eye, and it was fixed on me. A rush of blood surged through my veins. My heart thumped wildly in my chest, but I remained still. I had waited so long for this moment. The eye was open, and I had to act. I couldn't let it stare at me any longer. I crept closer, and I could hear my breath, shallow and ragged, as I neared the bed. The old man didn't stir, but his eye, it seemed to follow me. It was as though it knew what I was about to do. The eye became more intense, and I could feel it watching me, seeing me, even though I stood still. I had waited long enough. I struck. With a single movement, I smothered him. The old man struggled, but he couldn't fight back. I held the cloth over his face, and after a few moments, he fell still. His body lay there limp. I had done it. I had silenced the eye forever. For a moment, I was victorious. The room was silent, but then the noise started. It was faint at first, a small, barely perceptible sound. I stopped breathing, trying to listen closely. The sound grew louder, quicker, louder still. It was his heart. His heart was still beating. The heart, still alive inside his chest, pounding as though it refused to die. I froze. It grew louder. I could hear it above the sound of my own breath. Thump, 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 thump. It echoed through the room, shaking my very bones. How could it be? He was dead. I had killed him. But the heart, why could I still hear it? Thump, 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 thump. I felt myself growing desperate. I was losing control. The sound, it would never stop. It was driving me mad. Then I heard footsteps. Someone was coming. My heart raced even faster. I couldn't bear it. I couldn't let anyone find out. The sound, his heart, it was too much. I had to act. I quickly moved to cover up my crime. I took the old man's body, chopped it into pieces, and buried him under the floorboards. The sound of his heart grew even louder as I worked, but I ignored it. I had to get rid of the evidence. The footsteps grew louder. Someone was at the door. But the beating, I couldn't stop it. I had to keep calm. I had to appear innocent. When the police arrived, I greeted them with a smile. I acted as though everything was fine. I invited them in, and we sat in the very room where the murder had taken place. But the sound, his heart, was still there, pounding in my ears. Thump, 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 thump. The walls seemed to be vibrating with the noise. I watched the officers. They were searching, questioning, moving about the room, but they didn't hear it. They didn't hear the heart. They didn't hear what was tearing me apart. The noise became unbearable. It filled my mind, my soul. I couldn't stand it anymore. I couldn't pretend any longer. I screamed. I did it. I killed him. I buried him under the floorboards. I hear his heart. I hear it beating. I cried, my words tumbling out in a wild, frantic confession. The officers looked at me, confused. But the noise had stopped. I had confessed, and in that moment, the weight of the truth crushed me. I had heard the heart all along, and now I would never escape it. They were searching, questioning, moving about the room, but they didn't hear it. They didn't hear the heart. They didn't hear what was tearing me apart. The noise became unbearable. It filled my mind, my soul. I couldn't stand it anymore. I couldn't pretend any longer. I screamed. I did it. I killed him. I buried him under the floorboards. I hear his heart. I hear it beating. I cried, my words tumbling out in a wild, frantic confession. The officers looked at me, confused. But the noise had stopped. I had confessed, and in that moment, the weight of the truth crushed me. I had heard the heart all along, and now I would never escape it.